She threw the letter onto his chest before he could even open his mouth. "Read it," she said. "Read every word and then tell me to my face that you never wrote it." William Carter read it. His hands went cold, his name, his ranch, his river. Every detail perfect, except he had never written a single word of it. He looked up at her. "Someone used me to get to you." She stared at him. Or she said slowly, "Someone used me to get to you." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, everything changed. If you're new here, please subscribe and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far the story travels. Now, let's go back to where it started. William Carter had not spoken to another human being in 11 days when Tom Briggs came riding hard up the main road, hat in hand, hollering his name like the world was ending. 11 days. William had counted. Not because he was lonely, he told himself he was never lonely, but because silence had become the only language he completely trusted. And he kept track of it the way other men kept track of money. He stepped off the porch and watched Tom's horse throw mud as it skidded to a stop at the fence. "There's a woman at the station," Tom said, breathing hard. "Young. Came in on the morning train from back east. She's got a letter, William. Your name on it. Your address. Says you sent for her." He paused. "Says she came to marry you." William didn't move for a full 5 seconds. "Say that again," he said. "She thinks she's your bride." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. William felt the ripple of it move through him and said nothing. He turned around, walked into the barn, and began saddling his horse. Tom followed him in. "You didn't send for anyone?" "No." "Then who did?" "That's what I'm going to find out." He rode into town with his jaw set and his mind running fast over every possibility. Someone had used his name. Someone who knew his address, knew his property, knew enough about him to construct an entire false marriage arrangement and send a real woman across the country on the strength of it. That wasn't a prank. That was a plan. And plans like that didn't come from nowhere. The train station was small and drafty and smelled like coal smoke and damp wool. 3 people were waiting inside. A farmer he recognized from the south end of town, a telegraph clerk eating a sandwich, and a woman sitting alone on a wooden bench near the far wall, with a single suitcase at her feet and a folded letter in her hands. She looked up the moment he walked in. He didn't know what he had expected. Tears, maybe. Desperation. Someone who looked like they needed rescuing. She did not look like she needed rescuing. She was young, maybe late 20s, with brown hair pinned back and dark eyes that were watching him with an alertness that reminded him of a hawk watching a field. Her dress was worn but clean. Her coat was too thin for January in Montana. And she was sitting absolutely still, with the particular stillness of someone who has decided in advance to be ready for the worst. He crossed the room and stood in front of her. "Miss Ellis?" She stood immediately. Straight-backed. "Mr. Carter? I need to see that letter." No greeting. No pleasantries. She registered the bluntness and handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly. His name was at the top, his ranch address. Descriptions of his property so accurate they made the back of his neck tighten. The acreage, the river along the southern boundary, the size of the house, even the name of the nearest town. Whoever had written this had not guessed. They had known. And the promises inside it: a good home, a fair partnership, a respectable life, were promises he had never made to anyone in 25 years. He folded the letter and looked at her. "I didn't write this," he said. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp. She just looked at him for a moment with those steady dark eyes and said, "I know." He blinked. "You know, I started to suspect somewhere around the Ohio border," she said. The language was too careful, too constructed. Real men who want wives write letters that sound like they're asking for something. This letter sounded like someone selling something. She paused. "But I was already on the train, and I had nowhere else to go." William stared at her for a long moment. In 25 years of living alone, he had developed an ability to read people quickly and accurately. The way you learn to read weather when your livelihood depends on it. And what he read in Margaret Ellis in those few seconds was not weakness, not calculation, not the performance of a woman trying to make herself pitiable. It was intelligence. And underneath the intelligence, something bruised but entirely unbroken. "All right," he said. "There's a storm coming. You can't stay here." He picked up her suitcase before she could object. It was heavier than he expected. "Come to the ranch. We'll sort this out." She looked at him for just a moment, a single flicker of something crossing her face. Too fast to name, and then she put on her thin coat and followed him. They were halfway back to the ranch when the snow started. She didn't complain about the cold. She didn't ask questions. She sat beside him on the wagon seat and watched the land go white around them with an expression that was very difficult to read. He found himself, against all habit, curious about it. "You said you had nowhere else to go," he said, not looking at her. "That's correct. What happened to where you came from?" A pause. Long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "I left a job I could no longer safely keep. I left a city where I had become inconvenient to someone who had the resources to make my life very difficult." She stopped. "The advertisement seemed like an exit. I took it. An exit to marry a man you'd never met." "An exit," she repeated quietly. The marriage was secondary. He glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead at the snow. He looked back at the road and thought about that the kind of circumstances that would make a woman choose a stranger over staying where she was. The ranch came into view through the white. He pulled the wagon into the barn, unhitched the horse, and showed her to the guest room. It was full of boxes. She looked at them and immediately began moving them to one side to clear space. No complaint, no request for help. She just dealt with it. He brought her blankets. She thanked him without looking up from what she was doing. He went to the kitchen and stood at the window with cold coffee and let his mind do what it did best, work through a problem from every angle. Slowly, without rushing to conclusions, someone had used his name to bring this woman here. Someone who knew his property. Someone who had access to information about a placement agency in Helena. Someone who had resources enough to construct a false identity. Forge a document convincing enough to hold up to the scrutiny of an agency, and send a woman across several states on the strength of it. Only one name fit all of those requirements: Charles Whitmore. William set down the coffee cup. Whitmore, land investor, based in Helena, had come to William's gate twice in 3 years with offers for this ranch that were so high they were insulting in their transparency. The man wanted the river. He had never said so directly. Men like Whitmore never said anything directly. But William had heard enough around, enough to know that whoever controlled the water rights on this stretch of the territory controlled a great deal else besides. William had turned him down both times, politely the first time, very directly the second. He had not heard from Whitmore since, or so he had believed. He was still standing at the window when he heard a sound coming from down the hall. Very soft. The sound of something being set down carefully. Movement. Presence. He hadn't heard sounds like that in this house in a very long time. He told himself firmly that it didn't matter. He had a problem to solve and a stranger in his house and a storm outside and nothing else. That was the entirety of the situation, and he would treat it exactly as such. He went to bed at 10 and lay awake until past midnight. The next morning he came into the kitchen before dawn and stopped. The counter was clean. The papers, old freaks that had been sitting on almost in their caniform the past year, had been sorted and stacked. The firewood bin was full, and on the stove a small pot of water was already beginning to heat. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of this and felt something strange move through him. Not exactly emotion. More like the feeling of hearing a word you haven't heard in so long you'd almost forgotten it existed. Margaret came in from the hallway, dressed, hair pinned. She looked at his face, then at the kitchen. "I should have asked before rearranging things," she said immediately. "That was presumptuous of me." "No," he said. He sat down at the table. It's fine." She looked at him carefully. Then she moved to the stove and began making breakfast with the efficiency of someone who has been cooking for themselves for years and does it purely as a practical matter, not a performance. They ate together. She made eggs and bread and brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from him, and they ate in silence that was, for the first time, William could remember, not completely empty. When the plates were cleared, he spread the letter out on the table between them. "Tell me everything about where you were before you came here," he said. "Your job. Why you left everything." She folded her hands on the table, looked at the letter, then looked at him. "How much do you know about a man named Charles Whitmore?" she said. The air in the room changed so completely and so suddenly that William actually felt it. He leaned forward. "Tell me how you know that name." "I worked for him," she said. "I was his company's bookkeeper for nearly 2 years." The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. "And you left," William said. "I had to leave," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely precise. "There is a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. "What did you find?" She was still for a moment, that calculating stillness again, measuring how much to trust him, how much was safe. He recognized it. He had used that same stillness for 25 years. "I found a file," she said, "in a storage room that wasn't supposed to be important. A folder full of documents, contracts, deeds, correspondence. It took me about 20 minutes of reading to understand what I was looking at." She paused. "Whitmore has been taking land from families across the territory. Not buying it, taking it, using forged contracts, manufactured debt agreements, falsified legal pressures. He targets people who are isolated, people who don't have lawyers, people who don't understand what they're signing until it's already done." William said nothing. He was very still. "How many families?" he finally said. "In the file I found 14, but the file wasn't complete." She met his eyes. "I think there are more." "What did you do when you found it?" "I put it back," she said. "I went home. I didn't sleep for 2 days a beat. Then I went back and I made copies of everything I could." He looked at her. His voice was level. "Where are the copies now?" "In my suitcase," she said. "I've been carrying them since I left Richmond." Everything in the room went very quiet. William looked at this woman who had arrived at his gate less than 24 hours ago as a complete stranger, who he had been prepared to send away at first light, and felt the entire situation rearrange itself around him like a map, turning right side up. She hadn't come here by accident. She hadn't come here out of desperation alone. She had come here carrying ammunition, and the man who had arranged for her to come, who had manufactured the entire false marriage to deliver her to William's door, was the same man she was carrying evidence against. "He knows about the documents," William said. "Yes," she said quietly. "I believe so. I think he found out I made copies before I left. I think that's why the letter came when it did. He needed to know where I was. He needed to control the situation." She paused. "I walked right into it." "So did I," William said. He stood up and went to the window. 500 acres. A river running through the south end that men would break laws to own. A forged letter. A planned scheme sophisticated enough to use an innocent woman as a playing piece on a board she didn't even know she was on. He turned around. "Get the documents," he said. She was gone for less than a minute. She came back carrying a leather folder thick with papers, far more than he had expected. She set it on the table between them. He opened it. He read for 2 hours. He read carefully, turning pages slowly, going back when something didn't connect, cross-referencing dates and names and signatures. He was not a lawyer, but he was a man who had spent 25 years with plenty of time to read and a deep, instinctive understanding of when numbers didn't add up. And these numbers were catastrophic. Forged signatures. Land transfers with dates that preceded the supposed sales by weeks. Debt agreements referencing loans no bank had records of. Families named clearly: the Hargroves, the Keller family. A widow named Sutton, who had apparently signed away 60 acres she had homesteaded herself while believing she was signing a grazing lease. And woven through all of it, appearing again and again in the correspondence, was a single organizational name: Western Futures Placement Office, Helena, Montana. William looked up slowly. Margaret was watching him. She already knew what he had found. "That's the agency that sent you to me," he said. "Yes," she said. "He owns it." "I believe so. I couldn't find the direct connection in the documents I copied. But the correspondence reference it. Snuff that." She stopped. Chose her words. "It isn't a coincidence." William closed the folder. He set both hands flat on the table and looked at the woman across from him. She had come to his ranch carrying the evidence that could end Charles Whitmore. And Whitmore had arranged for her to come here to this specific ranch, this specific man, because he wanted William's land and he wanted to neutralize the woman who could destroy him. All at once. One move. He thought this would break something, William said slowly. "Yes," Margaret said. "He didn't plan on you keeping those documents all the way from Richmond to Montana." She looked at him steadily. "He underestimated how long I can carry something when I have to." William was quiet for a moment. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. He thought about 14 families. Maybe more. He thought about a widow signing away 60 acres she had homesteaded herself. He thought about his own gate, standing open. "Here is what we're going to do," he said. His voice was measured and certain. "Today, we make 2 additional copies of everything in this folder and hide them in separate locations on this property. If anything happens to the originals, we haven't lost our only evidence." He paused. "I know a judge in Billings. Territorial appointment. Old. Careful. Honest. I'm going to write to him today. And if Whitmore finds out you've contacted him, then we'll deal with that." He picked up the folder and held it for a moment. "You've been carrying this alone for 4 months, Miss Ellis. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was completely controlled, but something shifted behind it, very small. Very carefully guarded the way a candle flame moves when a door opens somewhere in the house. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. William considered the question. He looked at the folder in his hands, at the names inside it, at the 14 families and the widow and all the people behind all the pages. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "And because someone used my name to do something wrong. And I intend to make that right." He set the folder down. "And because this ranch has been quiet for 25 years, and I'm beginning to think quiet isn't the same thing as safe." He picked up his coat from the hook. "I'm going to the barn," he said. "There's work to do. When I come back, we'll start making the copies." He was halfway to the door when she said, "Mr. Carter." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. He didn't turn around. He stood there for just a moment with his hand on the door. Then he said, "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. It's barely started." He went out into the cold. In the barn he stood for a long time among his horses, listening to the snow against the roof, breathing the warm, familiar smell of hay and animals and wood. He had spent 25 years building a life around stillness and distance and the careful management of anything that might matter too much. In the last 24 hours, a stranger had arrived at his gate, filled his kitchen with the sound of movement, cooked him breakfast, and set a folder of evidence on his table that was going to force him to step directly into the kind of conflict he had spent 2 decades avoiding. And he had said yes to all of it. He didn't know what that meant yet. He was not the kind of man who rushed to understand things. He was the kind of man who waited and watched and let understanding come at its own pace. But somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet, unexamined, not yet spoken something was already changing. The man who had closed the door on the world 25 years ago had, this morning, without quite realizing what he was doing, left it open. And the wind coming through it cold and real and carrying everything that comes with a genuine human presence was something he had not felt for a very, very long time. Outside, the storm still pressed down on the ranch. Inside, in the house, a woman was carefully making copies of documents that would either bring a powerful man to justice or put them both in the path of something dangerous. The documents on that table had already set something in motion. Something that would force William Carter out of his silence, back into the world and face to face with the truth that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. And Whitmore, sitting warm and confident in his Helena office, certain his plan was unfolding exactly as designed, had no idea that the two people he had placed on a board as pawns had just looked at each other across a kitchen table and decided to play an entirely. The copies took most of the afternoon. Margaret worked at the kitchen table with the careful, methodical precision of someone who had spent years handling documents that mattered. She wrote quickly but cleanly, her handwriting small and exact. Each page reproduced with the kind of attention that came from understanding exactly what was at stake if a single name or date was missed. William sat across from her, reading each page she finished, checking it against the original, and setting it in one of two separate stacks. They didn't talk much while they worked, but the silence between them had changed from the day before. It was no longer the silence of two strangers being careful around each other. It was the silence of two people focused on the same problem. There was a difference, and William felt it, even if he didn't name it. When the last page was done, William took one complete set of copies, rolled them inside an oilcloth, and went to the barn. He was gone for 20 minutes. When he came back, he didn't say where he'd hidden them, and Margaret didn't ask. He took the second set, wrapped it separately, and disappeared into the back of the house. Again, she didn't ask. He came back to the kitchen and sat down. "The originals stay with you," he said. "In the suitcase. Where they've been. Don't move them to anywhere predictable." She nodded. "I wrote to Judge Harlan this morning, before you woke up," he said. "Sent it with a rider to the telegraph office in town. It won't reach Billings until tomorrow at the earliest. After that we wait. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," William said, "we act like nothing has changed." She looked at him steadily. "You mean we act like I'm simply here as arranged?" "Yeah." A pause. Something moved across her face, not discomfort exactly, but an awareness of what that meant, of how it would look to the town, of what people would assume. "Does that bother you?" he asked. She considered the question with the same x she brought to everything. "It depends," she said, "on whether you intend to treat me as a person or as a prop." William met her eyes. "I've never treated anyone as a prop in my life." "Then no," she said. "It doesn't bother me." The storm had quieted overnight, but the cold had not. The next morning, William went into town for supplies and took Margaret with him. He had considered leaving her at the ranch, but that would have looked wrong. A man who had supposedly arranged for a woman to come from Virginia, leaving her at home the first time he went to town. Whitmore had people everywhere. William had learned that about men like Whitmore, they always had eyes in places you didn't expect. The town of Grayfield was small enough that a new face was an event. By the time William's wagon reached the main street, 3 people had already stopped to look. By the time he helped Margaret down from the seat in front of Haskell's general store, there were 5. Clara Haskell herself came out from behind the counter before they'd even reached the door. She was 60 years old, had run the store for 30 of them, and missed nothing. Absolutely nothing. "William Carter," she said, looking at Margaret with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. "I heard there was a development. Miss Margaret Ellis," William said. "She's staying at the ranch." Clara Haskell looked at Margaret the way a jeweler looks at a stone of uncertain origin. "Where are you from, dear?" "Richmond, Virginia," Margaret said pleasantly. "It's a long way. I'm still adjusting to the cold, I imagine so." Clara's eyes moved to William. "Will she be staying long?" "As long as needed," William said, and walked into the store. Behind him, he heard Clara say quietly to Margaret, "He hasn't had a woman in that house since before most people's memory." A pause. "You must be something." He didn't hear Margaret's response. He was already at the back of the store, but he found himself, for just a second, curious what it was. They were loading the wagon when Deputy Roy Garrett came across the street toward them with the particular walk of a man who has been told to do something he isn't fully comfortable with. Garrett was young, 28, maybe 30, and basically honest, which in William's experience was the most dangerous kind of lawman to deal with in a town where a powerful man had interests. Basically honest men could be pushed in the wrong direction by the right kind of pressure without ever knowing, and it was happening. William, Garrett said. He touched his hat at Margaret. "Ma'am, Roy," William said without stopping what he was doing. "Got a message for you." Garrett held out a folded paper. "Man rode in this morning. Said to deliver it personal." William took it. He looked at the outside. His name, in handwriting, he didn't recognize. He opened it. The message was short, 4 lines. He read it twice, then folded it and put it in his coat pocket. "Everything all right?" Garrett asked. His eyes moved to Margaret and back to William. "Fine," William said. "Thank you, Roy." He helped Margaret up onto the wagon seat, climbed up himself, and they drove back toward the ranch, without speaking. They were a mile outside of town before Margaret said, "What did it say?" He reached into his pocket and handed it to her. She read it. Her hands, which had been perfectly steady all morning, stilled. The message read, "Mr. Carter, I understand you have a house guest. I also understand there may have been some confusion about the arrangements that brought her to you. I would very much like to discuss this in person, at your convenience, before any misunderstandings cause problems for either of you. I am in Grayfield until Friday. See Whitmore." Margaret read it a second time. Then she folded it and handed it back. "He moves fast," she said. "He always has," William said. "He knew you were here before we were even back from town yesterday. Someone told him." "Who?" "Could be anyone. Grayfield is a small place, and I brought you to the station in front of Tom Briggs and the station master and 2 other men." He kept his eyes on the road. "It doesn't matter who. What matters is that he knows. And he's already trying to get in front of it. What does discuss this in person mean for a man like him?" "It means he wants to look us in the eye and figure out how much we know," William said. "It means he wants to make an offer. And it means that if the offer doesn't work, he'll move to something else." "Something else meaning pressure," William said simply. "That's all men like Whitmore have. They buy what they can and press on what they can't buy until it breaks." Margaret was quiet for a moment. The wagon moved through the cold and the white and the hard silence of the open land. "Are you going to meet with him?" she asked. "Yes," William said. She turned to look at him. "That's dangerous, I know." He glanced at her. "But refusing to meet him tells him we're afraid. And afraid men make mistakes." He looked back at the road. "Besides, I want to see his face." "What do you expect to see?" "I don't know yet," William said. "But I'll know it when I do." Whitmore came to the ranch the next morning. He arrived in a carriage, an actual carriage, not a wagon, which in Grayfield in January was a statement as much as a transportation choice. He was perhaps 55, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since settled into something more calculated. He wore a good coat. He smiled the moment William opened the gate. "Mr. Carter," he said warmly, extending his hand. "It's been too long." William shook it because refusing would have been information. "Mr. Whitmore." Whitmore's eyes moved immediately to Margaret, who was standing on the porch. His expression didn't change. That was the tell a man who unexpectedly sees the person he's been looking for goes very still for just a fraction of a second. Just long enough to recalibrate. Whitmore went still for exactly that long. And then the smile came back, and William filed that away. "This must be Miss Ellis," Whitmore said. "It is," William said. Whitmore looked at her pleasantly. "A long way from Richmond." "Yes," Margaret said. Her voice was perfectly even. "It is." Something passed between them, a current of mutual recognition, of 2 people who know each other's capabilities and are choosing very carefully how to proceed. William felt it and said nothing. "Come inside," William said. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the documents had been spread the day before, now bare and clean. William put coffee on. Whitmore set his hat on the table and folded his hands with the ease of a man accustomed to negotiating in other people's spaces. "I'll be direct," Whitmore said. "I understand there's been some confusion about how Miss Ellis came to be here. I want to clear that up." "Please do," William said. Whitmore's eyes moved briefly to Margaret and back. The placement agency that handled her correspondence was one I have a minor association with. An investment, purely. I wasn't aware that there had been an error in processing her application, that your name was incorrectly matched to her file. He spread his hands in an open gesture of reasonableness. "A clerical mistake. Deeply regrettable. I came to personally apologize and, of course, to ensure that Miss Ellis is taken care of, travel expenses reimbursed. Proper accommodation arranged." "That's very generous," William said. "It's the least I can do." "And what about the land?" William said. A beat. Brief but real. "I beg your land," William said. "You've made 2 offers in 3 years. The last one was 14 months ago. I declined both times. I'm wondering if the clerical mistake and your personal appearance in my kitchen this morning are connected to your continued interest in my property." Whitmore's smile stayed exactly where it was. That took effort, and William could see the effort. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "I understand why you might draw that connection. But I'm sure you do assure me," William said. "That's fine. I'll be just as direct. The answer to any offer for this ranch is still no. It will remain no. The answer will not change based on what arrangements are made in my name without my knowledge or consent." He picked up his coffee cup. "We understand each other?" The smile narrowed by exactly the width of 1 degree. "Of course," Whitmore said. He looked at Margaret. "And you, Miss Ellis? You're comfortable here? Provided for?" "Completely," she said. "There's nothing I can do for you? No arrangements you'd like made, a return fare?" "Perhaps. Accommodation in Helena while you determine your next." "I'm staying," she said. The 2 words dropped into the room like something solid. Whitmore looked at her for a moment, not longer than was comfortable. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger exactly, but the recalibration of a man whose plan has encountered a variable it didn't account for. "Well," he said. He picked up his hat, stood. "You're both clearly settled in your minds. I appreciate the coffee, Mr. Carter." He looked around the kitchen once. The way a man looks at a thing he intends to have eventually. "You have a fine property here." "I know," William said. He walked Whitmore to the door. They shook hands again on the porch. The carriage pulled away. William stood and watched it until it was completely out of sight. Then he went inside. Margaret was still at the table. She hadn't moved. She was staring at the spot on the table where Whitmore had set his hat. "He's going to move quickly now," she said. Her voice was quiet but absolutely certain. That conversation didn't go the way he needed it to. He came here to assess the situation. Now he's assessed it. "I know," William said. "He'll try something else within the week." "I know that too." She looked up at him. "You're not worried?" He sat down across from her. "I'm worried," he said. "But worried doesn't help. Prepared does. What do? We wait to hear from Judge Harlan. We keep the documents safe, and we live our lives normally enough that he doesn't have anything to react to." He paused. "And we start asking around, carefully, about the families in those documents. If any of them are still in the territory, they're witnesses. Their testimony alongside the documents is something a judge can act on. The documents alone are strong, but testimony from the people who were hurt changes everything," Margaret said quietly. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Hargrove family. In the file, there was a letter from a Thomas Hargrove challenging the validity of the transfer of his farm. The address on the letter was outside a town called Millhaven." She paused. "I memorized it. I wasn't sure why at the time. I think I knew even then that I might need it." William looked at her. "How far is Millhaven?" "I don't know this territory." 2 days' ride east," William said. "Maybe less in decent weather, and if Thomas Hargrove is still there, then we go talk to him," William said. "But not yet. Not until we hear from Harlan." He met her eyes. One move at a time, Miss Ellis. We do this right. Or we don't do it at all. She nodded slowly. You're very methodical. I've had 25 years of practice, thinking carefully before acting, he said. And there was something in his voice, when he said it, something that wasn't quite the statement it appeared to be on the surface, that had an older, heavier weight behind it. She heard it. She didn't comment on it, but he could tell she heard it. That evening she cooked again something with dried beans and salt pork that filled the kitchen with a warmth that was more than temperatures, and they sat across from each other at the table for the second time and ate together. This time, the silence had conversation threaded through it, small and careful at first, then gradually less so. She told him about Richmond, not about Whitmore, but about the city itself, the way it had rebuilt itself in the years after the war. The strange layering of old grief and determined new energy. The way people there carried history in their body without always knowing it. He told her about Montana when he had first come, the scale of it. The way a man could ride for an entire day and feel smaller at the end of it than at the beginning. Did you come out here alone? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I came with someone. A pause that lasted just long enough to close a door. A long time ago. She didn't push. She simply moved to the next thing. The way a river moves around a stone, not ignoring it. Just understanding it's there and finding the natural path. He noticed that. He noticed it the way you notice when someone has been in difficult situations long enough to develop a particular kind of consideration for other people's pain. Not politeness. Something realer than that. 3 days passed. They established a rhythm without discussing it. William did the morning chores. Margaret organized and prepared the kitchen, handled breakfast, and spent parts of the day reviewing the documents, cross-referencing, making additional notes, building a map of Whitmore's operation that was more complete than any single document in the folder. She had a mind that moved through information, the way water moves through rock slowly, but leaving nothing unchanged. In the evenings they talked. Not always about Whitmore, sometimes about nothing in particular. It had been so long since William had talked about nothing in particular with another person that he had forgotten it was possible. On the 4th day, the reply came from Judge Harlan. William read it at the table while Margaret stood at the counter. He read it once, then a second time, then set it down. Well, she said. He's interested, William said. But he needs more than what I described in the telegraph. He needs to see the documents himself. He looked up a signed statement from at least one victim. Someone who lost land and can testify to the circumstances. The Hargroves, Margaret said immediately. The Hargroves, William agreed. We leave day after tomorrow. The weather looks passable. She nodded. Then she said, he also said something else, didn't he? It wasn't a question. He looked at her. You changed when you were reading it, she said. Halfway through. Your face changed. He looked at the letter for a moment. Then he asked about your standing, your legal position here. He said that a woman who came under false pretenses, whose presence here is technically based on a fraudulent arrangement, may have difficulty being treated as a credible witness unless her position is. He stopped. Unless her position is clarified, Margaret said. Yes. The room was very quiet, he means, she said carefully. That a woman living alone with a man she is not married to in once 892 in a Montana territory is a woman whose credibility a good defense lawyer could destroy in 20 minutes. Yes, William said. That's what he means. She looked at the table. Her hands were folded in front of her in that precise, controlled way she had. He watched her process it, not panicking, not dramatizing, just very quietly working through the reality of the situation. What are you thinking? He said. She looked up. I'm thinking that Charles Whitmore probably anticipated this. I'm thinking that when he arranged for a letter in your name to bring me here, he may have specifically calculated that my being here unmarried, under false circumstances, would make me useless as a witness. She paused. It's a very elegant trap, actually. Yes, William said. It is. She looked at him directly. Mr. Carter. I want to be very clear about something. I am not going to ask you to do anything you're not prepared to do. Whatever the judge requires, there are other ways to. I'll do it, William said. She stopped. What? If it means the Hargroves get their farm back. If it means 14 families, and however many more get what was taken from them back. He looked at her steadily. I'll do it. She stared at him. You understand what you're saying? I understand exactly what I'm saying. We've known each other for 4 days. I know, that's not a reasonable basis for no, he said. It isn't. He held her gaze. But neither is sending 14 families worth of evidence to a judge without giving it every possible chance of success. He paused. I'm a practical man, Miss Ellis. I'm not proposing out of sentiment. I'm proposing because it's the right move, at the right time, for the right reason. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her, working through it, the logic of it. The risk of it, the sheer strange reality of sitting in a kitchen in Montana, being proposed to by a man she had met under entirely fraudulent circumstances 4 days ago. This is, she said finally, without any question, the strangest conversation I have ever had. I imagine so, he said. She looked down at the table, then back up at him. If I say yes, if this is what it takes, I want you to understand something clearly. Tell me, I am not a grateful woman. I don't operate from gratitude. If I say yes, it is because I believe it is the right strategic choice, and because I believe you are an honest man, and because I believe what we are trying to do matters enough to justify it. She paused. Not because you rescued me. Good, he said. I didn't rescue you. You walked in carrying the evidence. You memorized the address of a family you'd never met because you knew someday you'd need it. You've been protecting those documents for 4 months alone. He looked at her. If anything, you rescued the situation. Something in her face shifted. Very small, very real, all right, she said quietly. Then yes. He nodded once, picked up the letter. I'll write back to Harlan today. She was quiet. Then she said, Mr. Carter William, he said without looking up. A pause. William, she said. The word was careful and new in her mouth. Like something being tried for the first time. Why are you really doing this? He was still for a moment. He set the letter down. He looked at the table, and was quiet for long enough that the question might have gone unanswered. Then he said, because I spent 25 years deciding that the safest thing was to let the world go on without me. And somewhere in the last 4 days I have been reminded that safe and right are not always the same thing. She said nothing. But when he looked up, she was watching him with an expression that was open in a way he hadn't seen on her face before. Unguarded, just briefly, in the way that only the truest things make a person unguarded. He looked away first. Get some sleep, he said. We leave early day after tomorrow, she stood. Pushed in her chair. Started for the hallway. She stopped at the doorway. William, she said. The man who came to your door with the letter. Whitmore's messenger, she paused. He'll be back. And next time he won't come in a carriage, and he won't smile. I know, William said. Are you ready for that? He looked at her over his shoulder. Miss Ellis, he said, I have been alone on this land for 25 years. I have survived 3 winters that killed cattle, and 2 droughts that broke better men than me. I have held this ranch through every kind of pressure the world has tried to put on it. He turned back to the table. I am ready. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Good. So am I, and she went to bed. William sat at the table for a long time after that. The house was quiet around him, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been a week ago. A week ago, the quiet had been total absolute, like a held breath that never released. Now it was the quiet of a house where someone else was sleeping down the hall. Where someone else's coat was on the second hook by the door. Where the kitchen smelled like someone else's cooking, and the papers on the table were not his receipts and old catalogs, but evidence of a wrong that he had somehow become responsible for helping to right. He had lived alone for 25 years because it was easier. Because grief makes everything feel like too much and nothing feel like enough. Because he had loved someone once and lost her, and the losing had seemed, at the time, like proof that this was simply not something he was meant to have. He had never stopped to ask himself whether proof could be wrong. He sat at the table until the fire in the stove burned low. Then he stood, banked it carefully, and went to bed. In 2 days they would ride east to find Thomas Hargrove. In a few weeks, if things went as he hoped, a judge in Billings would have in his hands the beginning of a case that would take apart everything Charles Whitmore had built on other people's ruin. And in the morning, when William came into the kitchen before dawn, there would be a small pot of water already heating on the stove, and the sound of someone moving quietly at the other end of the house, and the particular and unfamiliar warmth of not being entirely alone. He did not examine that too closely, but he did not turn away from it either. They left before sunrise. William had the wagon ready by the time Margaret came out of the house with her bag and the leather folder tucked under her arm. She had wrapped it in oilcloth again and tied it with cord. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. They both understood that the documents went where she went. Always until this was over. The first hour of the ride was cold and quiet in a way that felt purposeful rather than empty. The land around them was still half frozen, the mud packed hard enough to make the wheels ring against it. The sky the pale gray of very early morning before the sun has committed to anything. William drove, and Margaret sat beside him, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes moving across the landscape with that alert, cataloging attention he had come to recognize as her natural state. "Tell me about the Hargroves," she said finally. "What do you know about them?" "Not much directly," he said. "I know the name. Thomas Hargrove. Had a farm about 30 miles east of Millhaven. Good land, near a creek. He'd been on it for 11 years before he stopped." Corrected himself. "Before whatever happened. The file said he filed a challenge," Margaret said. "He went to someone. He tried to fight it. Then he's not a man who gave up easily," William said. "Which means he may still be there. Men who fight for land don't usually walk away from the land even when they've lost it." She nodded slowly. "Or he's gone completely, and we've ridden 2 days for nothing." "That's possible," William agreed. "You don't seem worried about that possibility." "I'm worried about it," he said. "I'm just not going to let worrying about it change whether we go." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Separate the worry from the decision." "Most people can't." He thought about it honestly. "Practice," he said. "And loss. When you've already experienced the worst thing you were afraid of, the other fears get smaller." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. He hadn't meant to say something that real. It had come out anyway, the way things sometimes do when you've spent enough time in someone's company that your guard dropped without you noticing. She didn't ask what he meant. She just said, "Yes, I know what you mean." And she looked back at the road. And somehow that was exactly the right response. They stopped at midday at a small way station to water the horse. The man running it was old and weathered, and not especially interested in conversation, which suited them both. They ate the food Margaret had packed: bread, hard cheese, dried apples, without sitting down, standing beside the wagon in the cold. She was rewrapping the remaining bread when she said, without looking up, he had someone watching the ranch. William looked at her. "What did you see?" "When we left this morning. A rider. East side of the tree line, about a quarter-mile back. He moved when we moved." She finished wrapping the bread and put it back in the bag. "He's not behind us now. Either he turned back when he saw our direction, or he went ahead to report." William absorbed this. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He looked at her. "You didn't say anything." "I wanted to be certain first," she said. "And I didn't want you to change course. If you'd turned back or changed direction, he would have known you spotted him and reported that too." She met his eyes. "Better to let him think we're just riding east on ordinary business." William was quiet for a moment. "You have good instincts. I had a good reason to develop them," she said simply. "When I was still working for Whitmore's company, I started to understand how he operated. He watches before he moves. He gathers information first. That rider wasn't a threat today, he was reconnaissance. which means Whitmore knows where we're going. He knows we're riding east. He may not know exactly where. She paused, or he may. It depends on how much he knows about the contents of the file. William picked up the reins. Then we move faster. They made better time in the afternoon. The road improved, and William pushed the horse harder than was comfortable. But the animal was strong and well rested, and took it without complaint. By early evening, they had covered ground he had expected to take until tomorrow morning. And when a small farmhouse appeared with lamplight in its window, he pulled in and negotiated a night's shelter with the family inside, a young couple with 2 small children who asked no questions and were grateful for the money. Margaret slept in the house. Williams slept in the barn with the horse and the documents, the leather folder tucked against his side. He lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the farm. An animal shifting in its stall, wind in the roof. Somewhere in the house, a child coughing softly, and then quiet. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life being lived in a place someone had fought to keep. He thought about Thomas Hargrove. About 11 years on a piece of land. About what it would take to uproot a man from 11 years of work. To manufacture a debt he didn't owe and a document he didn't sign. And drive him off the land before the law caught up with the lie. He thought about Whitmore, smiling at his kitchen table with his hat on the chair. He pressed his jaw together and closed his eyes. In the morning, Margaret came out of the house carrying 2 cups of coffee that the young wife had pressed on her. She handed one to William without comment. It was hot and strong and very good. "How far?" she asked. 4 hours, he said. Maybe less. They found Thomas Hargrove in exactly the place William had predicted on the land he'd lost. Not farming it. He couldn't farm it anymore, legally speaking. But he was there. He had built a small rough structure on the edge of his old property line, just outside the boundary of what had been taken from him. And he was living in it. His wife left a year after the farm went. His 2 older children had gone with her. He had 1 son left, 17 years old, who looked at William and Margaret with the flat, exhausted eyes of someone who had learned too young that the world was not fair. Thomas Hargrove himself was 51 years old and looked 70. He was not a broken man. William could see that clearly. There was still something upright in him, something that had not bent. But it was the uprightness of a man who had been fighting for so long that fighting had simply become his natural posture. And he had forgotten what it felt like to stand without bracing for the next blow. He looked at them from the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Whatever you're offering, I've heard it before. And if Whitmore sent you, you can turn that wagon around right now." "Whitmore didn't send us," William said. "My name is William Carter. I own a ranch in Grayfield. This is Miss Margaret Ellis. She used to be Whitmore's bookkeeper." Hargrove's eyes moved to Margaret. They sharpened instantly. "His bookkeeper," he said. "Yes," Margaret said. "And I have the documents to prove what he did to you." The silence that followed that statement was the kind that happens when something a person has stopped believing in suddenly appears in front of them. Too real to dismiss and too fragile to grab at too hard. Hargrove stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. The inside of the structure was small and spare and painfully clean. The son, whose name was Daniel, sat at the table and didn't speak. But his eyes never left the leather folder Margaret set down on the table. William recognized that look. It was the look of someone seeing something they've been told doesn't exist. Hargrove sat down across from Margaret. William stood near the door. "Show me," Hargrove said. Margaret opened the folder. She pulled out the specific section she had organized the night before and laid it in front of him, page by page, explaining each document as she went what it was, what it meant, where the forgery was. She spoke clearly and precisely without talking down to him, treating him like the intelligent man he was. Hargrove looked at each page carefully. His hands on the table were very still. His son moved closer until he was standing behind his father's shoulder, reading along. When Margaret reached the last page, Hargrove was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I knew it." His voice was very quiet. I knew that document wasn't right. The signature, I told the lawyer, it wasn't right. He told me I was confused. He told me I was remembering wrong. He stopped, pressed his lips together. 11 years on that land. I know, Margaret said. My wife thought I was going crazy. She thought I was. She thought I had made a mistake somewhere and couldn't admit it. He stopped again. His son put a hand on his shoulder, and Hargrove covered it with his own without looking up. William looked at the floor. Mr. Hargrove, Margaret said. Her voice was very steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't quite steady. And William heard it. A territorial judge has agreed to review this case. But he needs a signed statement from someone who experienced what Whitmore did directly. Someone who can testify to the circumstances of what was taken from them. She paused. We came because your letter was in the file. Because you're the only person who fought back on record. And because that matters. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. If I sign something, if I stand up in front of a judge, what happens? What happens to me? To Daniel? I can't promise you nothing bad happens, Margaret said. I won't make you that promise, because I don't know if it's true. Whitmore will find out. He'll push back. She held his gaze. But we're going to be pushing back too. And we're not going to stop. Who's we? Hargrove said. He looked at William. I don't know you. No, William said. You don't. He moved away from the door and sat down at the table. But Whitmore wants my land too. He's had people watching my ranch. He arranged for a false marriage letter in my name to try and get leverage against me. He looked at Hargrove steadily. We're in the same position, Mr. Hargrove. The only difference is I haven't lost my property yet. I intend to keep it that way. And I intend to make sure what he did to you doesn't happen to anyone else. Hargrove looked at him for a long time. Measuring. William let him measure. Daniel, Hargrove said finally, without looking away from William, get the box. Daniel went to the back of the room and came back carrying a wooden box. He set it on the table. Hargrove opened it. Inside was a collection of papers, letters, receipts, a journal with entries going back years. And beneath all of it, a document folded many times over. I kept everything, Hargrove said. Every letter they sent me. Every notice. Every piece of paper connected to what they did. He looked at William. My lawyer told me to throw it away. Said it wasn't useful. Said it would just keep me angry. He paused. I kept it anyway. I don't know why. Maybe I just couldn't stop believing that one day someone would come along who wanted to see it. He unfolded the document at the bottom of the box and set it next to the page from Margaret's file. The same transaction. 2 different documents. 2 different signatures. One date that was impossible. Margaret looked at them side by side. Then she looked up at William. Her eyes were completely controlled, but her voice when she spoke was very slightly quieter than usual. This is the original, she said. The one Hargrove signed. And this, she touched the other page. This is the forgery Whitmore used to process the transfer. She paused. Side by side like this, no judge in the territory could look at these and reach any conclusion except fraud. Hargrove picked up both pages, held them together, looked at them for a moment with an expression that was equal parts grief and something else, something that had been held under for a very long time and was now, carefully, being allowed to surface. Where do I sign? He said. They spent 3 hours at Hargrove's table. Margaret walked him through the statement carefully, line by line, making sure every detail was accurate and specific. William added the ranch's notarial seal. He had brought it, on the chance it would be needed, and witnessed the signature. Daniel witnessed it too, his handwriting young and deliberate. The pen pressing too hard the way people's hands do when they're trying to make something permanent. When it was done, Hargrove sat back in his chair. He looked at the signed statement for a moment, then folded it and handed it to Margaret. That land, he said. If this works, if a judge actually does something, is there any chance? I don't know, William said honestly. I won't tell you what I don't know. But the judge reviewing this has authority to reverse fraudulent transfers. It has happened before in this territory. Not easily. Not quickly, he paused. But it has happened. Hargrove nodded slowly. Then I'll wait a little longer, he said. I've been waiting 3 years. A little longer won't break me. Margaret was carefully packing the documents back into the folder when Daniel, who had said almost nothing the entire time, looked up and spoke for the first time. That woman, he said. He was looking at Margaret. The widow Sutton, the one in your documents. He paused. Is she in the file? Margaret looked up. Yes. Why, she's in Millhaven, Daniel said. She works in the laundry there. Her name is Helen Sutton. She lost 60 acres. She talks about it still. Pa knows her. He looked at his father. She'd sign. Hargrove looked at his son with an expression that was too complicated to name. 2 witnesses are stronger than 1, Margaret said quietly. She looked at William. It's 3 hours to Millhaven, he said. I know. We'd be getting back to Grayfield a day later than planned. I know that too. He picked up his hat. Then let's go. They found Helen Sutton at the laundry, where Daniel said she'd be. She was 63 years old, white-haired, and had the hands of someone who had worked hard every day of her life. When Margaret sat down across from her at the small table in the back of the laundry and began laying out documents, Helen Sutton didn't say anything for a very long time. Then she said, I have been asking God to send me a reason to believe this wasn't over for 3 years. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't shake. She read every page Margaret put in front of her with the slow, thorough attention of a woman who had learned the hard way never to sign something she hadn't read 3 times. When she finished reading, she said, Where do I put my name? 2 witnesses. Both present. Both with original documents in Hargrove's case. Both with stories that matched the evidence in the folder, with the kind of precision that could only come from the truth. They were back on the road, heading west by late afternoon. Margaret had the folder on her lap, with both statements folded inside it. The extra weight of it was small, but both of them felt it. They rode in silence for a while. Then Margaret said, William. He looked at her. When we get back, Whitmore's people will be watching. She paused. He's going to know we went east. He's going to want to know why. Let him wonder, William said. He won't wonder long, she said. He's going to figure out we went to Hargrove. And when he does, he's going to move against Hargrove to prevent him testifying. William's jaw tightened. How fast? She said. A man like Whitmore has done this before. He knows exactly how much time he has before evidence becomes official. He's going to try to discredit Hargrove before the statement reaches the judge. She looked at him. Or worse. Worse meaning intimidation. Yes. We need to get the statement to Harlan before Whitmore can move against Hargrove, William said. Yes. And we need to send a second copy directly, not through the regular post. She paused. Do you trust the writer you used for the first telegraph? As much as I trust anyone, he said. That's not very reassuring. No, he agreed. It isn't. They were 2 hours from Grayfield when the trouble came. A rider appeared behind them on the road, then another. Not closing fast, just present, keeping pace. William saw them in his peripheral vision and didn't turn around. 2 riders, he said quietly. Since the last crossroads. I see them, Margaret said. She didn't turn either. They're not going to do anything on an open road in daylight. I know, he said. They're sending a message, yes. A pause. We know what you're doing. We know where you've been. We're watching. Something like that, William said. He kept the horse at a steady pace. Didn't slow down. Didn't speed up. The 2 riders behind them maintained their distance exactly. Like a shadow that knew it had been seen and no longer cared about hiding. When the lights of Grayfield appeared ahead, the riders turned off the road and disappeared. William pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the ranch gate. He sat for a moment, without moving. They want us scared, Margaret said. I know, are you? He thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. A little. The right amount. He looked at her. But not scared enough to stop. She looked at him. Then she nodded once firmly, the way she nodded when a decision had been made, and there was nothing more to discuss. They went inside. The ranch was exactly as they'd left it. Nothing disturbed. Nothing moved. But William walked through every room before he let himself settle. Checking windows, checking the barn, checking the locations where the extra copies were stored. Everything was where it should be. He came back to the kitchen. Margaret had the folder open on the table and was writing a cover letter for Judge Harlan. He realized, comprehensive and precise, laying out exactly what the attached documents showed and what the witness statements confirmed. She wrote quickly, her pen moving, with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting to do exactly this thing for a very long time. He put the kettle on and sat down across from her and watched her write. He didn't interrupt. He understood that she was in the middle of the most important thing she had done in months, and it deserved the space she was giving it. When she finished, she looked up, read it back to herself once, made 2 small corrections, then looked at him. "It's ready," she said. He picked up the cover letter, read it, took his time. It was clear and precise, and built its argument the way a well-made structure is built, one solid thing on top of another. Nothing resting on anything that couldn't hold it. "This is good," he said. "I know," she said simply. Not arrogance, just accuracy, he almost smiled. "First thing tomorrow. We send this to Harlan with the fastest writer I can find. And we send a copy to the Territorial Marshal's office in Helena." She looked up sharply. "That's risky, yes," he said. "But Harlan needs to know the Marshal has a copy too. It changes the calculation for everyone." He paused. "Whitmore has people in a lot of places. But if the Marshal has a copy of this and it goes missing, that's a very different problem than if just Harlan's copy disappears." She thought about it. Nodded. "You're right also," he said. "I want to go see Roy Garrett tomorrow." She looked at him. "The deputy? He's basically honest," William said. "You can work with basically honest. You trust him?" "I trust that he'd rather be on the right side of this than the wrong side. When it falls apart," William said. "Which it will. And when it does, Roy Garrett is going to need to have been the man who helped, not the man who looked away." She considered this for a moment. Then she said, "You're thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead." "I'm trying to," he said. She looked at him across the table. The lamp between them threw a warm, steady light. Outside, the wind was beginning to pick up again, the second real storm of the season pressing down from the north. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee, and the particular smell of a place that has recently been inhabited by people who are alive and purposeful and not hiding. "William," she said, "Whatever happens with the judge, whatever happens with Whitmore, I want you to know something." He looked at her. "I came here looking for an exit," she said. "A place to disappear to while I figured out what to do next. I didn't come here looking for this." She paused. "Any of this, I know," he said. "But I'm not sorry it happened," she said. And she said it in the direct, precise way. She said everything. Without decoration, without apology, as a simple and exact statement of fact. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Neither am I," outside. The wind pushed against the walls of the ranch house with the old familiar force of a Montana winter that had been waiting patiently all season to make itself felt. The fire in the stove crackled and held. The lamp burned steadily. And at the table, 2 people who had come to this moment by entirely different routes and through entirely different kind of law sat across from each other, with evidence enough to end a powerful man's operation spread between them. And neither of them mentioned what was also sitting in the room, quiet and careful, and still finding its shape in the space between what they said and what they meant. In the morning, William would find Roy Garrett. He would send a rider to Billings and another to Helena. He would begin the sequence of events that would either succeed or force Whitmore to move in ways that could no longer be managed quietly. And Whitmore, who had spent 3 years being the most dangerous person in every room he entered, was about to discover that he had made the one mistake that undoes even the most careful plans. He had underestimated both of them. Separately, that might have been survivable. Together, Roy Garrett was at his desk when William walked into the deputy's office the next morning, and the look on the young lawman's face said he had been expecting this visit and wasn't entirely sure how to feel about it. William sat down across from him without being invited. He set his hat on his knee and looked at Garrett directly and said, "I need to talk to you about Charles Whitmore." Garrett's expression didn't change, which was itself a kind of answer. A man who had nothing to hide about his relationship with Whitmore would have looked surprised. Garrett looked careful. "What about him?" Garrett said. "He's been in town," William said. "He came to my ranch. He sent riders to follow me on the road east. And I believe he's been using this county as an operating ground for land fraud against at least 14 families. Possibly more." He paused. "I have documents, witness statements. I've already written to Judge Harlan in Billings and sent a copy to the Territorial Marshal's office in Helena." That last part landed. He watched it land. Garrett's posture shifted slightly, not toward defensiveness, but toward attention. The way a man shifts when he realizes the ground under him is less stable than he thought. "The Marshal's office," Garrett said slowly. "Yes," William said. "Which means this is no longer a local matter that can be managed quietly. The question I'm here to ask you is simple." He held the deputy's gaze. "When this comes apart, and it will come apart, Roy, I promise you that which side do you want to be on?" Garrett looked at him for a long moment. He was young, but not stupid. He picked up a pencil from his desk and turned it over in his hands once. The way people handle small objects when they're thinking hard about something large. "Whitmore approached me 6 months ago," Garrett said. "He asked me to keep him informed about certain activities in the county, about certain people." He set the pencil down. "I didn't agree to anything, but I didn't refuse clearly either, and I've been uncomfortable about that ever since." "What did he offer you?" "Money. A recommendation for the sheriff's position in Helena when the current man retired." Garrett looked at his hands. "Things that would matter to a young man who wants to build something. And now?" William said. Garrett looked up. "And now a man I have respected my entire life is sitting across from me, telling me there's a judge and a marshal already involved, and asking me which side I want to be on." He was quiet for a moment. "I think you already know the answer to that, or you wouldn't have come here." "I needed to hear you say it," William said. "Then I'm saying it." Garrett pushed his chair back and stood up. "Tell me what you need." William told him. He needed Garrett to make a quiet official record of Whitmore's presence in the county, his visits to the ranch, and the incident with the 2 riders on the road east. Nothing dramatic, just documented. A lawman's record of observed events was different in weight from a civilian complaint, and when the case reached a formal proceeding, the difference would matter. Garrett wrote it all down while William talked, carefully and completely, not leaving anything out. When he finished writing, he said, "Whitmore is going to find out you came here." "I know," William said. "He's going to move faster." "I know that too," William said. He stood and put on his hat. "That's why I came here first thing this morning." He was back at the ranch within the hour. Margaret had the second set of copies ready to go, complete, organized, labeled in her clear, precise handwriting, with a cover page that summarized the contents in language a judge could follow, without needing to read every document first. She had been working since before he left. He looked at the package she handed him. It was wrapped in oilcloth and sealed. "The rider," she said. "Waiting at Haskell's store," he said. "Best horse in the county, and he knows the road to Billings better than anyone." "And Helena?" "Different rider. Leaves an hour behind the first one, different route." He looked at her. "If Whitmore's men stop one, the other gets through." She nodded. Then she said, "William, there's something else." Something in her voice made him stop. "Clara Haskell came by this morning, while you were gone," Margaret said. Her voice was steady, but there was something careful in it. "She wasn't unfriendly, but she told me something she thought I should know." She paused. "There are rumors in town. About me. Someone has been telling people that I came here under false pretenses. That I misrepresented myself to you. That I'm," she stopped. Chose the word precisely. "Dishonest." William was very still. "Whitmore," he said. "Who else?" Margaret said. "Clara said the rumors started 3 days ago. Right after he left the ranch." She met William's eyes. He's doing what we expected. He's trying to destroy my credibility before the case reaches anyone who matters. What exactly are people saying? That I forged the letter myself. That I used your name deliberately to get access to your property. That I'm not who I say I am. She paused. Clara didn't believe it. She told me that directly. But she said not everyone in Grayfield has her judgment. William put his hat back on. Then we go to town. She looked at him. What? We go to town, he said again. Today. Together. We have lunch at the common table at Henderson's. We talk to people. We let everyone see that I am standing beside you without any reservation. He held her gaze. The best answer to a rumor is a man who looks the town in the eye and makes his position clear. She stopped. That's not nothing. That could actually work. It'll work better than hiding at the ranch, he said. People will talk about that too, she said. A man and a woman, let them, he said. They'll be talking about the truth then. That's different from talking about a lie. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression was very difficult to read, a layering of things. Some of which had been there a long time, and some of which were newer. Then she said, all right. They went to town. They sat at the common table at Henderson's with the ordinary midday crowd. William nodded to the people he knew, introduced Margaret to those she hadn't met, and ordered coffee and food with the comfortable manner of a man who was exactly where he intended to be. He didn't perform confidence. He simply had it, and it was contagious. Margaret sat beside him and spoke when spoken to, answered questions directly and without excessive detail, and demonstrated in everything she did that she was exactly the kind of person that the rumors claimed she wasn't. Not through effort, simply by being herself, which William had come to understand was one of her particular strengths, that she was so entirely and consistently herself that there was no gap between her behavior and her character for doubt to get into. Clara Haskell sat down with them for 20 minutes and asked Margaret about Richmond and the work she had Richmond had done there, and listened to the answers with the focused attention of a woman updating her assessment of a person in real time. When she left, she squeezed Margaret's hand once, briefly, and that small gesture was worth more in Grayfield than a formal letter of recommendation. On the way back to the ranch, Margaret was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You've lived here a long time. 25 years, he said. People respect you. I've tried to deserve it, he said." She was quiet again. "Then does it bother you? What they'll say about us?" "About the arrangement. What we've agreed to." He thought about it honestly. "What bothers me," he said, "is what was done to Hargrove and Sutton and the others. What people say about me, and a decision I've made for reasons I know are right." He paused. "No. That doesn't bother me." She looked at him. "I ask because it matters to me that it doesn't cost you more than you know, Margaret." He said it firmly but not unkindly. "I'm 47 years old. I've been alone for 25 years. I know the cost of things." He kept his eyes on the road. "I know what I'm choosing." She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was very quiet. "So do I," she said. The trouble came that evening. William was in the barn when he heard the horse come fast up the road. He came out to find Daniel Hargrove Thomas's son pulling his horse to a stop at the gate, breathing hard, his face tight with something urgent. They came to the farm, Daniel said before William had even reached him. "Two men. Last night, they told my father that if he had signed anything, he needed to unsign it, that there would be consequences if he didn't." He stopped to catch his breath. "My father told them to get off his land. They left. But one of them said," he stopped. His jaw tightened. He said, "Accidents happen to people who don't know how to mind their own business." William felt cold. Not from the temperature. "Is your father all right?" he said. "Yes. He sent me here as soon as it was light." Daniel looked at him. "He said to tell you he's not changing his statement. He said to tell you that directly." A pause. "But I'm scared for him." William turned toward the house. Margaret. She appeared in the doorway. She had heard. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were moving fast. "Processing. They know about the statement," she said. "Yes." Which means they know about Hargrove faster than they should, she said. Which means. She stopped, looked at William. Someone in Grayfield told them where we went, or they followed us, and we only saw the two riders, William said. Either way, they moved against Hargrove, within 48 hours of us leaving his property. She came down the porch steps. The statement, has it reached Harlan? Not yet, William said. The rider left this morning. He won't be in Billings until tomorrow. Then we have until tomorrow, before the statement is officially in judicial hands, Margaret said. Her voice was precise and fast. Before that happens, Whitmore needs Hargrove to retract. After that, retraction is much less useful because the statement is already part of a formal proceeding. So we have 1 day, William said. 1 day, she confirmed. She looked at Daniel. Can you get back to your father tonight? Yes. Tell him to stay inside. Tell him not to open the door to anyone he doesn't know. Tell him the statement is already on its way to a judge, and that by this time tomorrow, retracting it will not help Whitmore. It will only hurt your father's credibility as a witness. She held Daniel's gaze. Tell him that the most dangerous thing he can do right now is doubt himself. Can you tell him that? Daniel looked at her for a moment. He was 17, and in the last 30 seconds he had been spoken to by this woman, as though he were entirely capable of handling exactly the situation he was in. The effect of that on his posture was visible. He straightened. Yes, he said. I can tell him that good. She looked at William. He needs an escort. He shouldn't ride back alone. I'll ride with him, William said immediately. And leave the ranch empty? He stopped. She was right. If Whitmore's men came to the ranch tonight, the ranch needed someone in it. The Copies needed someone with them. I'll go, said a voice from the gate. They both turned. Roy Garrett was standing at the fence. He had come quietly enough that neither of them had heard him arrive, which said something about how focused they had both been on the immediate problem. I heard what the boy said, Garrett said. He looked at William. I'll ride with him to his father's place. I'll stay the night. An official deputy present on that property is a different kind of message than just the family being there. He paused. Let them try to threaten Thomas Hargrove with a lawman on the premises. William looked at him. You'd do that. I told you which side I was on, Garrett said simply. This is what that means. The relief that moved through William was real and deep, and he let himself feel it for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. Daniel, go with the deputy, he said. Stay with your father until Garrett tells you it's safe to move. He looked at Garrett. If anything happens, you send word immediately. Understood, Garrett said. They rode out within minutes, Daniel and Garrett side by side, moving fast down the road toward the east. William stood at the gate and watched until they disappeared, then turned back to the house. Margaret was at the kitchen table with the original folder open, going through the documents one more time. He understood what she was doing. She was verifying, checking, making sure that everything that was supposed to be there was there and nothing had been disturbed. He sat down across from her. Let her finish. When she looked up, he said, They're going to come here next. Yes, she said. Tonight, possibly. Yes. Are you afraid, he said. She thought about it. Genuinely considered it, rather than dismissing the question. I was afraid in Richmond, she said. For 4 months I was afraid every single day. I was afraid on the train. I was afraid walking up to your gate not knowing what I would find. She looked at him. Right now I'm not afraid. I think it's because there's something to do. As long as there's something to do, I can manage. And when there's nothing to do, then I'll probably be afraid again, she said. But we'll deal with that later. He almost smiled. It moved across his face briefly and then settled back into the focused calm that was his natural state under pressure. All right, he said. Here's what we do. He spent the next 2 hours preparing the ranch the way he prepared for every serious problem methodically, without rushing, thinking 3 steps ahead. He moved the original folder to a location he had prepared specifically for this possibility, not obvious, not clever, in a way that would make someone look harder, just genuinely unremarkable. He checked every door and window. He loaded his rifle and set it within reach in the kitchen. He built up the fire in the stove, so the house was warm and well lit, and looked like exactly what it was, a home where people were awake and present and not hiding. Margaret watched him do all of this, and asked practical questions, and followed his logic, and at one point simply started doing one of the things he was going to do next before he could ask her to, which meant she had been thinking the same steps ahead he had. And that felt like something solid under his feet. The night was quiet. They sat at the kitchen table and waited. Not talking constantly, neither of them was a person who filled silence for comfort, but talking in the intervals when there was something worth saying. At some point, Margaret made tea and brought 2 cups to the table, and they sat with the tea and the lamp, and the rifle within reach, and the document safe in a location only William knew. And the night pressed in around the ranch house from all sides. At 9 o'clock they heard horses. More than 2. William counted hoofbeats 3, maybe 4 animals, coming up the road at a pace that wasn't urgent, but wasn't casual either. He stood. Margaret stood with him. He looked at her, and she nodded once. And he picked up the rifle, and went to stand beside the door. Not opening it yet, waiting. The horses stopped outside the gate. There was no knock. Instead, a voice not Whitmore's. Someone else's. Someone being paid to deliver a message called out. "Carter, we just want to talk." William opened the door and stepped onto the porch. He held the rifle loosely, not raised but visible. In the dark at the gate there were 4 riders. He couldn't see their faces clearly. He didn't need to. "Then talk," he said. "Mr. Whitmore would like to resolve this situation quietly," the voice said. "He's prepared to make a significant offer for the ranch. More than fair. He's also prepared to ensure that Miss Ellis and any persons she may have spoken to recently are not troubled further." A pause. "He's a reasonable man. This doesn't have to become something complicated." "It's already complicated," William said. "It's been complicated since he used my name to bring a woman across the country. It's been complicated since he took Thomas Hargrove's farm. It's been complicated since he filed a fraudulent transfer for 60 acres belonging to Helen Sutton." He held the man's direction steadily. "Tell Mr. Whitmore that the documents are already in the hands of Judge Harlan in Billings and the Territorial Marshal in Helena. Tell him that there are now 2 signed witness statements from people whose land he stole. And tell him that the next conversation he has about this matter should be with a lawyer, because it will not be with me." Silence from the gate. Then the voice said, quieter this time, with something harder in it. "You're making a mistake, Carter." "No," William said. "I'm correcting one." He kept his voice level. "Now get off my property." They left. Not fast, they took their time, letting the slowness be its own message. But they left. William stood on the porch until the sound of the horses had faded completely. Then went inside. Margaret was standing in the middle of the kitchen. She had heard every word through the door. "That was it," she said. "The last offer before he shifts to something else." "I know," William said. He set the rifle down. His hands were steady. "He'll file something. Some legal challenge. He has lawyers. He'll try to create a counter-narrative that the documents are forged, that the witnesses are unreliable, that you fabricated everything when you left his employ out of some grievance." "He can try," she said. "He will try," William said. "We need to be ready for that. We need Harlan to move quickly once he has the package." "There's something else," Margaret said. Her voice changed slightly, not weaker, but more careful. "There's a name in the documents that I didn't tell you about before. I held it back because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to say something I couldn't prove." William looked at her steadily. "Tell me now." She sat down. He sat across from her. The lamp burned between them. In the correspondence file, the internal letters between Whitmore and his legal team, there's a name that appears 4 times in connection with the fraudulent transfers, she said. Not as someone being defrauded, as someone facilitating. She paused. A lawyer in Helena named Caldwell prescribed legal language for the forged contracts, processed the transfers through a legitimate office so they would appear official. She looked at William. "He's not just Whitmore's lawyer. He's part of the machinery. William was quiet. Does Harlan's letter mention Caldwell? No, she said. I left his name out of the first package because I wanted to be certain before I accused a lawyer of fraud. Lawyers have ways of defending themselves against accusations that ordinary people don't. She paused. But after tonight, after they sent 4 riders to your gate, I think certainty is a luxury we no longer have time for. Can you write a supplemental statement tonight? Everything you know about Caldwell, every document that references him. The context for why each reference matters. Yes, she said. I can have it done by midnight. Then do it, William said. We send it with the morning's first post, directly to the marshal. Not through Harlan, directly. He paused. If Caldwell is involved, the marshal needs to know separately, so Whitmore can't use his legal connections to slow down the judicial process. She was already reaching for paper. He watched her begin to write, and thought about how far this had come from the morning 12 days ago, when he had ridden into Grayfield, expecting to find a confused woman he could politely redirect, and instead found someone who was already 3 moves ahead of a problem he hadn't even known existed. He thought about the 2 riders on the road east, about Daniel Hargrove's face, about Helen Sutton signing her name with the careful thoroughness of someone making something permanent, about Thomas Hargrove saying, I knew it was wrong, with the quiet devastation of a man being believed for the first time. He thought about Whitmore's smile at the kitchen table, and the 4 riders at the gate tonight, and the distance between a man who believes he controls everything and the moment he discovers he doesn't. He thought about Margaret, who had carried the documents from Richmond to Montana alone, and frightened and refusing to put them down. He stood up, went to the stove, and built the fire up for the long night ahead. Then he came back to the table and sat down and kept watch while she wrote. Because that was the only thing he could do right now, and he intended to do it completely. Outside, the wind moved through the ranch in long, slow waves. Inside, the lamp burned, and the pen moved, and the fire held. At 11 minutes past midnight, Margaret set down her pen. She looked at what she had written. Read it back once. Set it in front of William. He read it. When he finished, he looked up. This will be enough, he said. Yes, she said. I think it will. She looked at him across the table. They had been awake for 19 hours. She looked tired in the real, human way that people look tired when they have been doing something that mattered. Not depleted, just used up in the right direction. William, she said. After this is over. She stopped. Tried again. When this is over, what do you want? He looked at her. The question was simple and enormous, and he understood exactly what she was asking beneath the surface of it. He thought about 25 years of silence. He thought about the sound of someone moving down the hall in the morning. He thought about 2 cups of coffee on a cold morning at a way station, and the sound of a careful, unpracticed laugh in his kitchen, and a woman who handed him documents she had carried alone across half a country without once asking to be rescued. I want this ranch to still be standing, he said. I want Hargrove to have his farm back. I want Helen Sutton to know someone fought for what she lost. He paused. And I want to not be alone in this house anymore. She held his gaze. Her expression was completely open in that rare, specific way it went sometimes when she was not calculating or managing, but simply present. Then we make sure this works, she said. Yes, he said. We do. She gathered the new statement and set it with the rest of the papers for the morning dispatch. William banked the fire carefully. They moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of 2 people who had developed a shared rhythm without ever explicitly deciding to. At the door of the hallway, she stopped. The riders won't come back tonight, she said. It wasn't a question, no, he agreed. They delivered their message. Now they wait to see what we do next. Then get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to need all of us. She went to her room. He stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, looked at the table where the documents had been, looked at the door she had gone through, looked at the lamp burning low and steady. 25 years. He had held this ranch through everything the world had thrown at it. He had held it in silence, and in isolation, and in grief, and in the particular stubbornness of a man who did not know how to stop. He had been holding the wrong things all along, and it had taken a stranger at his gate, with a letter he never wrote, to show him the difference between holding on and holding out. Tomorrow the documents would begin their formal journey toward justice. Tomorrow Whitmore would learn that his plan had not only failed, but had brought into alignment the exact combination of people and evidence needed to bring him down. Tomorrow, everything that had been set in motion 12 days ago would move into its next and irreversible phase. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, William Carter went to bed in a house that did not feel empty. And that, he thought, as sleep came finally and completely, was already more than he had known to want. The reply from Judge Harlan arrived 9 days after they sent the documents. William was mending a fence post at the east edge of the property when Margaret came out, carrying the letter. And he knew from the way she was walking fast, controlled, not running, but close to it, that something had shifted. He set down his tools and met her halfway. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it standing in the cold, his breath making small clouds in the air. Harlan had received the package. He had reviewed the documents. He had received the supplemental statement about Caldwell. And in the careful, measured language of a man who had spent 30 years in territorial law and understood exactly what weight his words carried, he wrote that what he had been sent constituted sufficient cause to open a formal investigation into the land transfer activities of Charles Whitmore and his associated legal representatives. He was issuing a summons. He was requesting the presence of both William Carter and Margaret Ellis in Billings within the fortnight. And he was, effective immediately, placing a legal hold on any further transfers or challenges involving properties named in the documents. William read it twice, folded it, looked up at Margaret. "It's real," she said. It wasn't a question, but it sounded like one. The way statements sound like questions when a person has been waiting for something so long that its arrival feels impossible. "It's real," he said. She stood very still for a moment. He watched something move through her that she didn't try to control along. Slow release, like a breath held for months, finally let go. It was not tears. Margaret Ellis did not cry easily, and when she did it privately. But her eyes went bright for a moment, and her jaw set, and she pressed her lips together. Once, then that characteristic upright steadiness that he had come to understand Anne's was not performance, but simply the shape her courage took. "We need to write to Hargrove," she said, "and Garrett. And we need to arrange travel to Billings." "Yes," he said. All of that he paused. But first he held her gaze. "Take 1 minute. You've been carrying this since Richmond. Take 1 minute to let it mean something." She looked at him. Then she looked at the letter in his hand. Then she did something he hadn't seen her do before she closed her eyes. Just for a moment, 10 seconds, maybe 15, standing in the cold on his ranch with her hands at her sides and her face tilted slightly upward and her eyes closed. Then she opened them. "All right," she said, 1 minute, and she almost smiled. "Now let's go write those letters." The news moved through Grayfield faster than either of them expected. Garrett told it not carelessly, but deliberately, the way a smart lawman uses information as a tool. By the time William and Margaret went into town to arrange the travel to Billings, the shape of the story had already reached most people who mattered. Charles Whitmore, forged documents, stolen land, a judge in Billings with a formal hold on transfers. The response was not what William had predicted. He had expected skepticism. He had expected at least some people to defend Whitmore men who had benefited from his presence in the county. Men who had taken his money or his recommendations without asking too many questions. Instead, he found something quieter and more complicated. He found people who had wondered, who had felt something was wrong but couldn't name it, who had stories of their own smaller stories, not as dramatic as Hargrove's, but stories with the same fingerprints, a grazing lease that seemed to shift in meaning, A water rights agreement that turned out to benefit Whitmore's holdings more than anyone understood at signing. Small things. The kind of things that a person dismisses individually, but that form a pattern when seen together. Clara Haskell put it plainly when she stopped William on his way out of the store. People in small places know when something isn't right, she said. They just need someone to stand up first before they'll say so out loud. William nodded. I know, he said. That's what I should have understood a long time ago. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Margaret, who was waiting by the wagon. She's good for you, she said. Not as a question. Not as gossip. Just as a plain observation from a woman who had watched this county for 30 years and knew what she was seeing. Yes, William said, she is. They left for Billings 4 days later, William. Margaret, Garrett, as the official law enforcement representative, and Thomas Hargrove, who had insisted on coming himself. Daniel had wanted to come too, but his father had told him to stay and watch the property. And the way Hargrove said it with the quiet authority of a man, beginning to believe, again, that the property was still worth watching, was something William noticed and held on to. Helen Sutton met them in Billings. She had made her own way there, traveling with a neighbor, arriving a full day early. When Margaret saw her at the hotel, where they'd arranged to meet, Helen took both of Margaret's hands in hers and held them for a moment, without speaking. The look that passed between them needed no translation. Judge Harlan's office was smaller than William had imagined, and smelled like old paper wood smoke and the specific gravity of a room where serious decisions were made regularly. Harlan himself was 71, lean, with the eyes of a man who had heard every kind of lie and developed an absolute detector for the truth underneath them. He looked at Margaret for a long moment when she was introduced, and then said, You kept these documents for 4 months. Through traveling how many states? 3, she said. And most of Montana. Yes, she said. Good, Harlan said. Unafraid people make reckless witnesses. Sit down. The formal proceeding took 2 days. Harlan reviewed everything in the order Margaret had organized the original documents. The forged comparisons, the correspondence naming Caldwell, the witness statements from Hargrove and Sutton. He asked questions that were precise and sometimes brutal in their directness. And both William and Margaret answered them with the same precision. On the second afternoon, Harlan called in his clerk and dictated for 40 minutes without stopping. When he finished, he looked at William. Your ranch is not in legal jeopardy, he said. The hold I placed covers it fully, and I am making that permanent, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. He looked at Hargrove. The Hargrove farm transfer is being flagged for full review. I will not make promises about outcomes, but I will tell you that the evidence of forgery is in my 30 years on this bench among the clearest I have seen. Hargrove sat very still. His hands on the arms of the chair were pressed down hard. And Whitmore? William said. The territorial marshal has already moved, Harlan said. Mr. Whitmore was informed of the investigation 2 days ago. His lawyer, whose name I imagine you know, has already attempted to file a counter-challenge, arguing that the documents Miss Ellis brought were improperly obtained. He paused. I denied it. Miss Ellis was employed as a bookkeeper. The documents she copied were business records she had legitimate access to in the course of her work. There is no improper obtaining. That argument will not succeed, and Mr. Caldwell knows it. What happens now? Margaret said. Now, Harlan said, the machinery of the law moves. It moves slowly, it moves imperfectly, but it moves. He looked at her steadily. Because of what you did, it moves in the right direction. She held his gaze. She said nothing. She didn't need to. They were in the hall outside Harlan's office when Hargrove stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the corridor, with his hand against the wall, and his head bent, and his shoulders shaking slightly. Not crying or maybe crying the way men of his generation cry, which is without sound and with everything pointed down so no one has to see. William stopped beside him. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. After a moment, Hargrove straightened. He cleared his throat once. He looked at William with eyes that were red at the corners and said, 11 years. I know, William said. I had stopped believing. He stopped. Tried again. My wife left because she thought I had gone crazy. My children thought I had become obsessed with something that wasn't real. He pressed his lips together. I had started to think they were right. They weren't right, William said. No, Hargrove said. They weren't. He looked at Margaret, who was standing a few feet away, giving them space. She did that. She carried the proof. He paused. Tell her that I. He stopped because there was no sentence that completed that thought adequately. She knows, William said. Hargrove nodded, straightened fully, put his hat back on, and walked toward the door with his back, straight in a way that was different from before, not the straightness of a man bracing for the next blow, but the straightness of a man who was, for the first time in years, not bracing. On the ride back to Grayfield, Margaret was quiet for longer than usual. William let her be. He understood by now the difference between her silences, the working ones and the processing ones, and the ones that were simply her being comfortable enough not to fill the air. This was the last kind, and that, he thought, meant something. It was Helen Sutton who broke the quiet. She was riding in the wagon behind them with Garrett, and her voice carried clearly when she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" Nobody answered. She didn't need them to. "I keep thinking about the morning I signed that paper," she said. "I knew something was wrong. I felt it. But the lawyer was so polished and so certain, and I was just a widow alone, and I thought maybe I'm the one who doesn't understand." She paused. "That's what they count on, isn't it? That you'll trust their certainty more than your own knowing." Margaret turned around on the wagon seat. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what they count on." Helen looked at her. "Don't let them," she said. "Whatever happens next, don't ever let them." "I don't intend to," Margaret said. They arrived back in Grayfield on a Thursday afternoon in early March. And the first thing William noticed was that the mud on the main road had thawed and refrozen and thawed again, and was now settling into that particular consistency that meant the worst of winter was actually behind them. He noticed because he had been paying attention to the land for 25 years, and that kind of attention became automatic. Became the way you read the world without thinking about it. He also noticed that the second thing he thought was that he needed to tell Margaret about the mud and what it meant for planting timing. Because she had been asking questions about the kitchen garden and about what could be grown on the ranch south Soundbanks slope, and those were the questions of someone who was thinking about seasons ahead, and that meant something he did not want to examine too quickly. 2 weeks after Billings, a letter arrived from the marshal's office. Whitmore had been formally charged. Caldwell had resigned his legal practice, pending his own investigation. The Western Futures Placement Office had been ordered closed. William read the letter at the kitchen table with Margaret across from him. He read it once, handed it to her, and waited while she read it. She set it down, looked at it. "It's not over," she said. "The cases will take time. Hargrove's review. Sutton's claim. All of it." "I know," William said. "Whitmore has lawyers. Good ones, even without Caldwell. He'll fight every piece of this. I know that too." She looked at him. But he's fighting on defense now," William said. "He's not moving forward anymore. He's not taking anyone's land. He's not sending any more letters in anyone's name." He paused. "That's not nothing." She looked at the letter again. "No," she said quietly. "It's not nothing." The hardest conversation came on a Sunday morning in late March, when the ground was finally beginning to soften for real, and the light was coming through the kitchen window in the way it only comes in spring. At that specific angle that makes everything it touches look like it's being seen for the first time. Margaret had been in the kitchen when William came in from the morning chores. She was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, and she had the particular stillness of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and has decided to say it. He poured his own coffee, sat down, waited. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." She turned around. She leaned against the counter and held her cup with both hands and looked at him directly. The way she always looked at things she needed to see clearly. What we agreed to in January, she said. The practical arrangement. You said it was strategic. You said it was the right move for the right reason. She paused. Was that true? He looked at her. Which part are you asking about? Whether it was only strategic. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird was doing something optimistic in the eaves. No, he said. It wasn't only strategic. She held his gaze. When did you know that? He thought about it honestly. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give her the real one. Not the comfortable one. The morning after the first night, he said. You had reorganized the kitchen. I came in before dawn, and the room looked different. Felt different, he paused. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was wrong. She was very still, Margaret, he said. I spent 25 years deciding that wanting something was too dangerous. That caring about a place, or a person, or a future, was something I couldn't afford. He looked at her. I was wrong about that too. I was wrong about almost all of it. She set her cup down on the counter. She crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him at the table. She folded her hands. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that missed nothing. I came here looking for an exit, she said. I told you that. Yes. I wasn't looking for. She stopped. Started again. I am not a romantic person. I have never been a romantic person. I make decisions based on evidence and logic, and what the situation requires. I know, he said. And the evidence, she said carefully, and the logic, and what the situation, what I actually want, she paused. All of it points in the same direction. He looked at her. I want to stay, she said. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because it's practical. Not because of what we agreed in January. She held his gaze without flinching. Because this is where I want to be. Because you are who I want to be next to. She paused. That is the most uncharacteristic sentence I have ever said out loud. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the bird made another optimistic sound. Inside the kitchen, the spring light moved slowly across the table between them. Stay, he said. Simply, completely, stay. She looked at him. Something in her face opened fully for the first time, not the brief, guarded openings he had seen before, but something larger and less managed. The expression of a person who has been careful for so long that choosing to be uncareful feels like the most courageous thing they have ever done. All right, she said. I will. The formal hearing in the Whitmore case was held 6 weeks later in Helena. William and Margaret traveled together. Hargrove and his son were there. Helen Sutton was there. Garrett was there in his official capacity, presenting the documented record of Whitmore's activities in Grayfield County. 3 other families, whom the investigation had identified as victims, attended, as well people whose names had been in the later parts of the files, people who had not known until the investigation began that what had happened to them had a name and a perpetrator and a legal remedy. The courtroom was not dramatic in the way that stories make courtrooms dramatic. It was procedural and slow and full of legal language that required patience to follow. But Margaret followed all of it, leaning slightly forward in her seat, her eyes moving between the judge and Whitmore's lawyer and the documents being entered into evidence. And William watched her watch the proceedings with focused attention of someone who had built this case page by page and was now seeing it tested. When the session broke at midday, they stood eyed in the cold, and Hargrove said, "He looked smaller in there." William glanced at him. "Whitmore?" "Yes." Hargrove turned his collar up against the wind. "When I lost the farm, I had built him up into something enormous in my mind. Something unstoppable. Something that couldn't be touched." He paused. "In there he just looked like a man who got caught." "That's what he is," Margaret said. "Yes," Hargrove said. He looked at her. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of all of us. Because Thomas Hargrove kept a box of papers in the back of a small room and refused to throw them away." She looked at him directly. "That matters as much as anything I did." Hargrove pressed his lips together, nodded once, looked away at the street. His son put a hand on his shoulder. "The outcome of the case came in stages, the way legal outcomes do not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of decisions spread over months, each one building on the last. Whitmore was found liable for fraudulent land transfer in the cases of Thomas Hargrove, Helen Sutton, and 6 other families identified by the investigation. Caldwell was disbarred. The Western Futures Placement Office's records were seized and its fraudulent operations formally documented. 4 additional families were identified from those records, and their cases were placed under judicial review. The Hargrove farm was returned. Not quickly, not without additional months of legal process. Not without Hargrove having to stand in front of a judge a second time and explain the circumstances of the original transfer in exhausting detail. But it was returned. On a Tuesday morning in August, Thomas Hargrove walked back onto land that was legally his again. And his son was beside him, and Daniel Hargrove, who had been 17 and frightened when he rode hard to William's ranch in the dark, had grown into something different by the time they crossed that threshold together. Helen Sutton received a settlement that could not return to her the 3 years she had spent working in a laundry. But that restored the financial basis of her life and gave her, in her words, the ability to stop counting every single day. She wrote a letter to Margaret after the settlement. William didn't read it. It was private, but he saw Margaret's face while she read it. And afterward she set it down on the table and sat quietly for a moment, and then said, "I need to go check the garden," and went outside. And he let her go. Some things are best felt alone, with dirt under your hands, an open sky overhead, and no one watching. In Grayfield, the story settled into the way all true stories settle into the fabric of how people understood their place and their history and what was possible when someone refused to stop. Margaret was not treated as a hero in the self-conscious way. She was treated as a person who had done something real, which is more durable than heroism and more useful. People knew what she had done. They knew why she had come. They knew the shape of the false letter and the leather folder and the journey east in the cold and the cold, signed statements and the judge in Billings. They knew all of it, and knowing it, they made their own quiet recalibrations about what kind of woman she was and what kind of a man William Carter had turned out to be. Clara Haskell, who held more standing in Grayfield's social fabric than anyone with a formal title, said on a Thursday afternoon in late summer to the 4 women who formed the functional center of the town's opinion, that woman could have disappeared to anywhere with those documents. She could have used them to protect herself and left everyone else to manage on their own. She paused significantly. She didn't. She stayed and she fought. That tells you everything. It was September when Margaret planted the last of what she'd been working on in the kitchen garden, a long border of something she'd gotten from a woman in town. Flowers that wouldn't bloom until next year, but that she had put in the ground anyway, which was in itself statement about permanence that William understood without needing it explained. He was watching from the porch when she came back inside, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at him with that direct, undecorated gaze. "Those won't come up until spring," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll be here in spring." He looked at her. She looked back at him. Between them was everything that had happened since a cold January morning when a wagon arrived at his gate and a woman stepped down, carrying a suitcase and a letter and a secret that she had been carrying alone for 4 months and would never have to carry alone again. "Yes," he said. "You will." There was no ceremony to the moment. No grand declaration. Just a man and a woman on a ranch porch in early September in Montana, with the smell of turned earth coming in from the garden and the long amber light of the season going gold around the edges, and 25 years of silence, finally and completely behind them. William Carter had spent the better part of his adult life believing that the safest thing was to want nothing that could be taken. He had built his life around that belief so completely that he had stopped noticing it was a prison. Margaret Ellis had spent years inside a different kind of prison, a world that measured her value in what she could produce and document and prove, that never once asked her simply what she wanted. Neither of them had set out to find each other. Neither of them had written the letter that brought her to his gate. Neither of them had chosen the circumstances that put them at the same kitchen table with the same impossible problem. But they had chosen each other. Every day, in every small decision, the 2 cups of coffee. The lamp kept burning through the long nights. The ride to Millhaven. The 4 riders at the gate, faced down from the porch. They had chosen each other. Over and over, in the accumulated weight of ordinary moments that were not ordinary at all. The woman who arrived as a stranger became the person this house had always been waiting for. The man who had closed himself off from the world discovered that some doors, once opened by the right person, simply cannot be closed again. And the ranch that had been silent for 25 years became what it had always had the capacity to be, not just land held by one man against all comers, but home, real home, the kind that is not made of walls or acreage or legal title, but of 2 people who have looked at each other clearly, without flinching, and said, "Yes, this you here." That is what remained when the storm passed. Not the drama of the courtroom, or the vindication of the verdict, or even the justice that 14 families finally received. Those things mattered enormously. But what remained, quietly and permanently, after all of it was done, was simply this: 2 people who had each stopped pretending that being alone was the same as being safe, and had built something true in the space that opened when they finally put that pretense down. Some stories end with justice. Some end with love. The best ones end with both quietly, on a porch in September, with flowers in the ground that will bloom in the spring. This was that kind of story, and it was entirely, completely, and without question real.